What's going on, guys? Welcome back, and today I am going to be bringing you part 3 of my Middle-earth review series. Now, today I am going to be talking about the final installment in the Hobbit trilogy, The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. Now, in my previous video, I kind of foreshadowed that this one is weaker and that I don't like it as much, and I don't. I don't like this as much as, well, any of the other Middle-earth films, and that's not because I dislike it, because I don't. It's a film that has a very special place in my heart, and I still love it, but it's not as good as any of the other ones. It's still a good film. I can't, in good faith, call it a bad film, because I don't think it is, but comparatively to how great all of the other Middle-earth films are, it just kind of pales in comparison. And that's because this is where you can tell they really dragged out these movies. This, if you didn't know, The Hobbit was originally going to be 2 films, and then Guillermo del Toro stepped away, and then Peter Jackson came in, and then they stretched it out. And you can tell that Tolkien knew that this point in the story was not as investing for people, because the goal had been achieved. The Hobbit is an adventure story, and by the end of, the second film, the goal has technically been achieved. They've made it to Erebor, they've got the gold back. You still have to find out what happens to Smaug, but really, at the beginning of this film, everything has been achieved that they set out to do. So it's just kind of wrapping up loose ends. That's the same way the book was, but the book did it way quicker. The book wrapped it up in a couple chapters. The Battle of the Five Armies actual event is only like 3 pages in the actual book. It's very short, and this film is almost entirely this giant battle, and it's kind of slow for a lot of it. It's kind of a slow build up to the battle, and then the battle happens, and then you're kind of like, oh, it's over. And there are entertaining moments, and there are moments of emotion, and there is heart and soul in this film, which you don't see a lot in modern blockbusters. But it feels dragged out. It feels like it didn't need to be as long as it is. A lot of scenes have unnecessary padding, and you could say that about the previous films, but it doesn't really bother me as much there, because I think, the movies had a good pace to them. Like, it felt like they were constantly moving. In this film, the padding is a lot more noticeable than in the previous films, because it's much slower. It's a much slower film. There's a lot of unnecessarily dragged out scenes that, as a result, drag down the movie. And yeah, that's kind of my opening little preamble there. And, there's just a lot of kind of weird little logistical things that stick out more in this film. For example, there's a scene at the beginning of the film when Bard is breaking out of prison in Lake Town in order to try and take down Smaug, and he throws a rope out the window to latch onto the boat so that it'll pull the window off his jail cell. And he ends up choking Stephen Fry, the master of Lake Town, and somehow doesn't choke him to death? Like, I don't understand how that happened. Like, how is Stephen Fry strong enough that he can pull a freaking wooden wall out and not have that break his neck? Like, I don't understand that, but it's kind of like you gotta suspend your disbelief. I understand that. But then there's just a bunch of things that kind of are missing, like, and don't make a lot of sense. Like, towards the end of the film, when Thorin comes out of the mountain and joins the battle, they're like, his cousin Dane is like, "What are you gonna do, Thorin?" And then he's like, "We're gonna go take out Azog." And then he jumps on a freaking mountain goat, and you're like, wait, where did you get the mountain goat from? Where are these guys coming from? And in the extended cut, Dane's army comes riding on mountain goats, but that's not in the theatrical version for some reason. So these mountain goats randomly come out of nowhere, and they just ride them to the top of the Raven Hill, and it's like, wait, what? Where did this come from? And then, there's just kind of a weird point where Azog is just on top of Raven Hill, and he got there at some point, like in the last day, I guess, but it's like, how did you get up there and set up like a base and all these flags and stuff? Like, how did no one see you do that? There are like multiple armies, like, hanging out in this area. Like, how did no one notice you get up there? What? How? When? What? Why? Like, none of that makes any sense. And then there's a point towards the end of the film where Legolas rides in to warn them about the second army that's coming in. And then he's like, "Gandalf!" And it's like, wait, how do you know who Gandalf is? You haven't met each other yet. In The Lord of the Rings, they know each other, but this is before that. So how do you know Gandalf? I can understand Gandalf knowing who Legolas is, because Gandalf knows everybody and he's a wizard, but Legolas? Why did he come to Gandalf? It would have made more sense if he came to, like, his father or someone else that's there. Like, why would he come to Gandalf, and why would he know Gandalf's name and who he is? Like, what? Why? And then there's, like, a lot of just unnecessary elements. Like, for example, when Gandalf arrives and starts warning them of the coming attack, Thranduil, for some reason, doubts Gandalf and is telling him that, like, oh, it's just a storm. You know, nothing bad's gonna happen, even though in the previous film, like, they captured an orc, and it was, like, taunting Thranduil about how, like, your world will burn, and all this stuff, and I'm like, well, why don't you believe Gandalf, then? Because, like, you were literally told that there was, like, an apocalyptic event coming. Why are you doubting Gandalf now? What? Like, there's just so many weird moments where it's, like, you kind of padded it out, and you kind of created, like, weird plot holes and stuff. It's like, wait, why did that happen? And, you know, there's just kind of a lot of weird elements. Like, the Sauron plotline is, like, kind of interesting. Like, it's kind of cool to see them tie it into Lord of the Rings, and it's cool to see Galadriel, Elrond, and Saruman actually get in on the action, unlike in the Lord of the Rings. Like, Saruman was the main villain in the Lord of the Rings, and he didn't really do a lot except stand around. So it's cool to see them get in on the action and fight and stuff, but you kind of don't really know what Sauron's trying to do. Like, he's got an orc army, and they're going to go take over the Lonely Mountain, and then therefore they're going to be able to spread and kind of take over all the lands. I understand that part, but it's kind of like, how is this benefiting Sauron himself? And in the extended versions of these films, they have this subplot where Sauron has been collecting all of the rings, the 9 rings that went to mortal men, the 7 that went to the dwarf lords, the 3 that went to the elven lords or whatever. And, you know, you understand that, okay, he's trying to collect all these rings so that he can restore the power of the one ring to himself. But that's cut from the theatrical version, so you don't really know what Sauron's ultimate goal is here. So then he gets vanished into Mordor or whatever, and then he's there when the Lord of the Rings starts. Like, it's kind of okay. Like, it's fine. I don't mind that plot element, because in the book they do talk about how Gandalf went and they vanished the necromancer or something, but they don't really talk any further than that. They don't say it was Sauron, so it's a cool expansion upon the source material, but there's kind of some context missing that was actually filled in the extended cuts. And there's just, like, other weird things, like Alfred, the character of Alfred, who's, like, the crony of the Master of Lake Town, and he's just a relentlessly irritating character that they gave so much screen time to, and it doesn't feel like they needed to, because he doesn't serve a purpose, and it feels especially strange because they cut out the scene where they actually give him some closure, because there's a scene in the extended cut, or a deleted scene, where basically he's in this contraption and Gandalf's fighting a troll and Gandalf's getting beaten up, and then a coin falls out of his whatever corset or whatever, because he's wearing a dress because he's a coward, and then a coin falls on this pressure point and then it catapults him into the troll's mouth. And I understand his character's a metaphor for greed, an allegory for greed, but we already have that. We have that very obviously displayed with Thorin, and even with Thranduil, with all, like, a majority of the characters, there's that allegory for greed, so he's not a necessary part. It's not like they don't have that thematic element present already, so he doesn't really serve a purpose. They cut out the scene where he gets closure, and he's just kind of there to be annoying, and doesn't really, like, there's not really a point in him being there. He's just, like, an asshole, and you don't even get to see what happens to him. He just runs away and he never comes back, and you're like, oh, okay. Like, I understand, like, you know, there are people like that in life, you know, that's kind of what that's meant to refer to, but the theme of greed is already heavily explored here, so we don't need him here. He's just kind of an unnecessary part that don't really, you know, need to be there. And then there's just elements that feel kind of like they fall flat because they don't have enough time to explore them. For example, Legolas has a really large role in this film. Like, he probably has even more of a major role than in the Lord of the Rings films, because in the Lord of the Rings films, he's there, he's cool. But here, he's actually, like, there, and he discovers the second orc army and all this, and he has a really large part, surprisingly. But they introduce randomly this point where he and Tauriel go to this orc stronghold, and then he just randomly goes, my mother died in there. There's no grave, no memory. And it's really sad. And then the only kind of real expansion we got on that is at the end of the film, Legolas is leaving, and then his dad's like, Legolas, your mother loved you. And it's like, was there ever any doubt about that fact? Like, they never talked about his mom being a jerk or anything, so why would he have any reason to believe that his mother did not love him? Like, what's this? Why is this here? And then also the relationship between Tauriel and Keely. As I said in my previous video, I don't mind that romance. It doesn't bother me, but there are more compelling elements, and it feels kind of half-baked by the end of it. And then just kind of the way they kill off Philly and Keely is a little bit kind of anticlimactic in the movie. I don't want to say they should have done a better job killing off main characters. It's never good when you see a main character die. It's sad. But the way they take them out of the story feels like kind of weak here. In the book, you don't see it, but after Bilbo wakes up and they describe to him what happened, you find out that they died defending Thorin, which is a pretty honorable way to go out. But in this movie, Thorin sends them into a really dangerous area for some reason. He sends his 2 young nephews into this really dangerous location, and then one of them gets killed, and then Keely dies defending Tauriel, which is okay, but for some reason they nerfed Tauriel and made her into like a damsel in distress for no reason, which was really annoying, I found, because she was a cool character in the Desolation of Smaug, but then she's just being a damsel in distress for the sake of it, because you have to have Keely defend her and then Legolas defend her, and it's like, why does she just suddenly suck at fighting? Like, why can't she fight Bolg? Like, she should have been able to fight Bolg. Like, they should be evenly matched. Why does she just now suck? Like, why is she not doing a good job now? It's just, like, it's annoying, because she's the one kind of really badass female character in these movies, I mean, besides Galadriel, and they just kind of nerfed her to have male characters step in and have their badass moments, which is kind of irritating. And you know, there are just lines and things that don't make a lot of sense. Like, there's this point when Gandalf is talking to Bilbo, and it's a dialogue exchange that is in the book, and Bilbo says, "I'm not afraid of Thorin," and Gandalf says, "You should be, because, you know, dragon sickness seeps into the hearts of all who are susceptible to it. Almost all." And then kind of winks, and is obviously referring to Bilbo. But in the context of the movie, that doesn't make any sense, because the other dwarves have not, you know, been manipulated, and they aren't changing or anything. They don't even like that Thorin is now being a nut job. Like, Thorin's being a jerk throughout the whole movie, and it's not like they're supporting that or they're acting the same way. They know something's up with him. So why is Gandalf saying that it seeps into the hearts of all who come near it or whatever? Like, yeah, it hasn't changed Bilbo, but it hasn't changed the other dwarves either. If they'd said in the context of the movie that, you know, it's just something that comes from Thorin's bloodline, it's like his grandfather had it, they say that in the first movie, and then Thorin's got it, that would have made more sense. But it's like they ripped that dialogue exchange from the book without actually thinking about how it fits in the context of the actual movies, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And then the last thing I'll say, you know, that about this film that is negative before I get into my positives is, this is where the CGI really starts to stick out like a sore thumb. Because the moments that I like the most about this movie are the small character moments, once again. The moments that I like about all these movies are the small, tender moments. And there are plenty of those. There are even more than I'd say are in The Desolation of Smaug. But Desolation of Smaug is a far better movie. But it's just so weird looking, because in the previous films they did a good job of blending the CGI elements with the actual on location, you know, scenes where they're in New Zealand, and they looked really beautiful. But in this film, you can just tell that it's all been digitally created. It's not there, it's not real. So the battle doesn't feel like it has weight. It just feels like you're watching, as I've seen some people say in the past, CGI noise, and that's what I'd call this battle. It just feels considerably less impressive than the Middle-earth movies, than in the Lord of the Rings movies. Like, the Return of the King has, like, multiple battles, and they're better than this, because a lot of them were shot with practical elements, and they're really impressive. But it's a shame that a majority of this movie is a battle, and the battle isn't that impressive. Like, there are cool moments in the battle, don't get me wrong, but there are just a lot of not so great moments where it's just this really kind of honestly weak CGI. You know, like, don't get me wrong, it's better than a lot of other movies that really heavily utilize CGI. I like it better than any Marvel movie, but it's still just kind of pales in comparison to the other movies and how they utilize CGI. It's not bad CGI. It's good CGI for the most part, and I feel like Peter Jackson knows how to use CGI well. But if I were to point at any element of these movies, you know, with the CGI looking bad, it's this one. This is the movie where it sticks out the most and where I feel, overuse it a little bit. And with that said, that's about all I have to say negatively about this film. Let's get into the good stuff. And there's a lot of good stuff, as there is in all these movies. The opening scene is fantastic, and it's the best of, I would say, all three of these movies, with Smaug coming down upon Lake Town. And once again, there's just a perfectly adapted scene from book to screen. It's just really exciting. The score is great. It probably is my favorite track from the soundtrack. You have Bard facing down Smaug, and it's just really exciting. It's really well done. The lighting, with the fire and everything, it's just really great. And then when you have Smaug flying away, kind of a fun little Easter egg is that he is chanting to himself, "I am fire, I am death," the same thing that he said at the end of The Desolation of Smaug, but he's running out of breath. He's trying to say it to encourage himself, but then right as he's about to say death, he actually dies. So he said, "I am fire, I am dead." I don't know, it's just kind of a funny little tidbit, but I think it's cool. And just the way they animated him, just once again, some of the best CGI work ever. You know, the way he dies and like how there's just all these little details in his bodily movements. He's just jerking around. Like, it's really well done. And yeah, the whole opening scene is fantastic. And Bard as a character is far more humble, I feel, than in the book. Because in the book, he shoots down Smaug. He doesn't get introduced until he shoots down Smaug. But he shoots down Smaug, and then they climb out of the water, and in the book, they're all sad. They're like, "Oh no, Bard's dead." But then in the movie, Bard climbs out, and he's like, "Bard is not dead." That's the way that it happens in the book. In the movie, he comes out and he tries to defend Alfred, this guy that's been nothing but a nuisance to him. And he's just far more humble. He's not trying to, take the fame. And that's not to say he's a bad person in the book. He's a good person in the book. But in the book, he's a little bit more accepting of kind of the honor and the praise people place upon him. In the movie, he doesn't really love that. He's just trying to support everyone else and do the best job he can. He doesn't want to take any more than what was promised to him. And I honestly just prefer his portrayal in the films to the book. That's just me. And I kind of prefer the way the Master of Lake Town dies in this one, because there's that really great irony with him trying to escape, and then Smaug ends up falling directly on top of his boat. I really like that. I like that kind of ironic element, that irony, the kind of guy got taken out by in some form, kind of the element of his desire, because he wanted to get into the dragon, and then wanted to get a hold of the gold, and then the thing that was guarding the gold, which was the dragon, ends up falling directly on top of him. I don't know, I kind of prefer that to the book, because in the book, they basically just say at the end that he got some of the gold from the mountain, and then he ran away and died of starvation because he was kind of affected by the gold sickness. But I kind of like the more direct irony of the way he goes out in the film. So that's just a small thing, but I kind of prefer it here. Then Thorin's gold sickness, or the dragon sickness element, I prefer in this to the book, because in the book it kind of comes out of the blue. Once again, it's an allegory for greed. But in the films, they ultimately had that in place from the beginning of the first film, where, Ian Holm narrates the opening and says that some kind of sickness lay on the treasure and it drove Thorin's grandfather mad, and the same thing is now happening to Thorin, and they talked about that in the previous film a little bit, so it has been heavily foreshadowed, and it comes less out of the blue in the films, and I really love all of that. I really love, Thorin's arc and how he has to overcome the sickness, and when he sees kind of he goes into the chamber where Smaug was, where he tried to drown Smaug, and and then he sees himself drowning in the gold, and in a way that's kind of the Thorin King Under the Mountain part of him dying, but it's Thorin Oakenshield that comes out of it. And when he dies, because earlier in the film he was quoting the same thing that Smaug quoted in the previous film, it's almost like when that part of Thorin dies, that last bit of Smaug that was left also died. I kind of like that a lot, and I really like the whole element with Thorin and the gold sickness and how he has to overcome that. I think it's really well done in the film. And, you know, there's just, once again, those great little individual moments with Bilbo and Thorin when he has the acorn, and then he's talking to Thorin. Thorin thinks he has the Arkenstone, but it's just the acorn that he picked up in Beorn's garden, and he says, I want to plant it, I want to get home and remember everything that happened. And then you just see Thorin kind of smile, and it's just this sweet moment. It shows that despite whatever may be happening to someone internally, it's just there's always that one thing, that small thing that can bring someone true happiness. And I don't know, that's just such a beautiful moment. And then when Bilbo hands over the Arkenstone to Bard and Thranduil, and he's talking about how loyal the dwarves are, it's just really powerful stuff, really poignant, just sweet stuff. And, you know, there's just so many great elements. And honestly, the battle can be cool at points. You have the battle between Azog and Thorin and Bolg and Legolas, and it's cool stuff. You know, it's cool to see Legolas working to help Thorin. As I said previously, I kind of like that element. He feels like he owes Thorin after Thorin kind of saved him in the previous film. And you just have him basically shooting down orcs. They're trying to attack Thorin, and you have Thorin just taking on these orcs with literally nothing but a stub of a sword left. And then Legolas, like, just jumps on top of a troll, stabs the troll, knocks over this tower, and then just charges towards Bolg on top of the tower, and they start fighting. And then you have, you know, Thorin on top, and this orc is about to get him, and then Legolas throws the sword, and then Thorin grabs the sword, and then it's like this moment of, yeah, like he's reclaimed the weapon. You know, I don't know, I just love that. It's like Legolas saved him and at the same time gave him a new weapon, but it's like the returning of the sword to its rightful owner. There's just something satisfying about that. It's just an awesome moment. And then you have Thorin fighting Azog on the ice, and I really like that element as well, because Thorin ultimately outsmarts his opponent. Like, I really like that Thorin kind of uses the environment to his advantage. We don't see a lot of fights like that nowadays. Nowadays in a lot of blockbusters, it's just, we gotta shoot the bad guy enough to the point where they die or whatever, like in Marvel movies. But I like that in this battle, Thorin actually uses his wits and the environment that they're, like, in to actually defeat his opponent. Like, he dodges, and then just as Azog is swinging around this, like, club or whatever, is just breaking the ice around him, so then eventually Thorin throws the block back at him, and then he falls into the ice. I really like that. It's like Thorin actually used his wits to defeat his opponent, and not his, brute strength. He used his brains, not just his brawn. I really like that. We need more of that in battles like that. And then it gets a little bit stupid when Azog's floating under the ice or whatever. It's like Azog falls into the ice, and then Thorin sees his body floating under the ice, and he decides to follow it, and then Azog somehow propels himself up through the ice, and then they have this dramatic moment where Azog's sword is just like, its grooves fit perfectly into Thorin's sword, and then eventually Thorin can't hold out anymore, he gets stabbed, then he stabs Azog right through the ice. It's kind of just a little bit stupid. It's just like, how did Azog propel himself through the ice? Why did Thorin follow Azog's body floating under the ice? Like, if he hadn't done that, he probably wouldn't have died. It just feels stupid. Like, you could have had that dramatic beat without having this whole stupid, event of or this stupid, bunch of events happen where he's floating over the ice, and then he jumps up and then has to try and kill Thorin. It just feels kind of stupid and dragged out. And it's another element or example of padding in this movie. But then you just have the beautiful scene with Thorin, and, he's dying, and then Bilbo comes up to him, and you just have this beautiful moment, and this quote that is just so powerful and just is so, impactful considering, the way a lot of people view the world. And Thorin just says, if more people valued home above gold, this world would be a merrier place. And that's just such a powerful quote and applies to today really well. And it's like, you need to really value the small things in life. That's what this story is ultimately about. And then it brings that, like, all the way back to the beginning in the first film, where Bilbo says that he's going to stick around because they don't have a home and he wants to help them get their home back. And this quest that started out as people searching for a home, then getting that home back, but then Thorin, the person leading that expedition, fell prey to this thing, this sickness, and then started caring less about the home and his honor and the place that they were going towards as home, and more just gold, just this superfluous thing that isn't actually important. What is important is home and the people that are there. And when Thorin says that, it brings it all the way back to the first film, brings it full circle, and I think that's so beautiful. I think that's so well done. I love that. And yeah, they just close out his character arc perfectly. And then you have Thranduil come up to Tauriel, a character that earlier he had threatened, and you could see earlier that he obviously felt guilty. And then in this moment, you have Evangeline Lilly and Lee Pace just acting their hearts out. And she's like, why does this hurt so much? If this is love, I don't want it. And Thranduil just says, because it was real. And then you just have this real moment of understanding come across, this look of understanding that crosses Tauriel's face, and you realize that she understands him now, because he lost someone very important to him as well, his wife. And it's just such a well done scene. Like, just the acting is so great. And then you have the little Aragorn reference. Thranduil tells Legolas there's a ranger amongst the Dunedain named Strider. You'll have to find out his real name for yourself, which is a reference to Aragorn, which ultimately doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, because wouldn't Aragorn be, like, really young at this point? Because I know he's, like, 80-something in the originals, or in The Lord of the Rings, because, he ages slower than other people. But wouldn't he be really young even at this point? I don't know. But, it's a film that has heart, and it has soul, and it's not bad. It's not a bad film. You have a beautiful song in the end credits by Billy Boyd of The Last Goodbye that just makes me tear up every time. It's not a bad film. It's a film with heart, a film with soul. And you don't get that in modern blockbusters that much nowadays. But it's also incredibly flawed. It's not a perfect movie. It's very flawed, and with almost every element, though, where there's something bad or weak, there's always something that is good that kind of pulls it back out. You have the stupid moment with Azog jumping out of the ice, but then you have the beautiful scene with him and Bilbo. So, or with Thorin and Bilbo. So it's a very conflicted movie, I feel. Like, I don't know how they could have made it better. It's just where all the problems that were kind of only in the background for me in the first two really come to the forefront, like the weak CGI, some of the over-the-top elements that make it a little bit too cartoonish, and it's the weakest of the Hobbit films, looking at them objectively, but it still has some of my favorite moments, and it's still one of my favorite movies. I have a very soft spot for it, it has a special place in my heart, but it is flawed, and it's the weakest of all of the Middle-earth films. So, yeah, that's about all I have to say about The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. It's nowhere near as good of a conclusion as The Return of the King is to The Lord of the Rings, but it's still a good film in its own right. It's just because of how great the other Hobbit and Lord of the Rings films are that it just can't help but be a little bit disappointing. So, with all that said, that's all I have to say here about The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. You guys please let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.